met before this call, and I basically got a text of, "Hey, we're so busy. Let's do next week." They had generated 131 appointments from a fair this Saturday, and they had an after-school program. That's what that Goddard thing is, with 40 kids, and they had 10 first intros last night. So just to give you a sense of some of these things, that's what they look like today, Wednesday, on whatever it is, the 5th of June, from just a couple of activities they've had in the last week. So I wanted to make sure I shared that with you, and then I wanted to make sure we shared. This is Stephen D. Castillo. He was out doing a program at summer camps and daycares. You can tell what was going on, how many kids were there, and so forth.
And he's a Krav school.
Yeah, he's a Krav Maga school. And I wanted to make sure you saw that this had been shared. There's all kinds of information, and I know sometimes there's so much information that gets buried. But this is, we had talked about in our meeting yesterday, the live booth events and how to make that work. And we had shared this script, which is from Tim Harrison's school in Joliet, however you say that, Illinois. If you don't know, he did, I think, 119,000 last month. Well, that was April. I'm not sure where he finished in May, but he in all likelihood will be 1.5 million one location this year. He was I believe it was 1.3 million last year at that one location, and this is one of their better feeder programs. So I guess we posted a couple times, but that was the live event procedures directly there. So just as reference, if you hadn't had a chance to look at and see that stuff yet. But hey, let's. I'm going to go a different direction here for a second. And Bob, I haven't seen Tim. Maybe Tim is here. There's a Timothy. Anybody who's here, pop in on video here. But hey, let me give everybody a little bit of a background and revert for a second, if you don't mind. And for those of you who know all this, I apologize. For those of you who didn't know all of this and don't care, I apologize. And for those of you who find it valuable, great. But let me give you a little background. I started in 1969, so that makes me sound a lot older than I am, or at least older than I will admit to be. But we were in the YMCA in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We were in a YMCA, YWCA, and Oral Roberts University, Tahlequah Junior College, and I think University of Tulsa at the time. And all of those were little bitty, poorly run, very inexpensive clubs, run just as you might expect a YMCA or a YWCA to be. The only thing that makes that relevant, and if you've read the book or seen anything of Guy Kiyosaki, Robert Kiyosaki. I'm confusing Guy Kawasaki with Robert Kiyosaki. But his Rich Dad Poor Dad series, to a great extent, my martial arts background was Rich Dad Poor Dad story, because we happened to be a branch of satellite, if you will, of the Junri Institute. And the Junri Institute at the time was operating multiple schools in Washington, D.C. By the time I got there, they had gone to 9 and then 13 locations. They were a multi-million-dollar operation in the 70s and 80s, and the inflation factor is pretty dramatic on that. So I would say they were in the range of a $10 million a year operation on the karate school site, much less the safety equipment and everything else that we're doing at the time in Washington, D.C. So I had this group of instructors, and they're wonderful people: Grant Mulder, Greg Mulder, Bob Bollinghouse, David Harrelson, who had all come from the Junri, Allenstein, Pat Burleson, Blood and Guts era in Tulsa, and all had the perspective that to run martial arts, you either had to be broke or you had to have a day job to support yourself. And in fact, one of them took over his family business running a janitorial supply company. The other one went and became a full-time realtor, and then ended up working in special education. And then the other one, David, basically locked himself up in his apartment for a year and practiced grand piano, trying to get into Juilliard. And so when I went to Washington, D.C., even though we were a branch of the Junior Institute, I went from being surrounded with people who thought you needed to be broke to run a martial arts school to Jeff Smith driving a Mercedes, whatever the model number was at the time. I think it was 450 SL. He had a nice little brown Mercedes two-door convertible. And then Junri was living in a huge home, driving a Cadillac. And Nick Okinis, who was living in, I think it's Dan Rather, some famous newscaster's former home in Potomac, Maryland, overlooking the C&O Canal, driving at the time a Lincoln, and soon he was traded into a Rolls Corniche and then a Bentley Azure convertible. And so I went from this stark contrast of Grant Mulder, who told me when I moved to Denver to open schools, you can play karate for a while and then get a real job, to a group of people who were all making a substantial living running martial arts schools. And by the way, some of them were fighters. Jess went through the fighter. He wasn't making a career from fighting. He was making a career from running schools for June Rhee, which is something else I figured out pretty quickly. But at the June Rhee Institute at the time, like I said, it was 13 locations, I'm guessing. At the time, 5,000 students, maybe a little bit more between the locations. And then when I moved to Denver, I ended up with 5 schools in 18 months, 6 schools in 30 months. And by the time I was about 26 years old, had 3,500 active students. And what the reason I'm saying this is unfortunately, we have an interesting mix on this Wednesday call. I say unfortunately, I mean, it's fortunate because the purpose of this meeting is to take small schools and turn them into medium-sized schools and then turn them into big schools. On the other hand, what we had what was it, Bob, an hour and a half meeting yesterday of our team. And, our conversation behind the scenes is unfortunately broke people oftentimes are broke just because their mindset, keeps them broke. And when I talk about numbers, like the numbers that I just talked about, oftentimes they don't understand it. They don't believe it. They think that we're full of shit, one thing or another. It is interesting, and that's part of the reason why we have the discussion forum. We have, including on this meeting, but on a regular basis, we have the other schools that we're working with that are doing well. We're trying to give you references of what's really going out in the field in real time. But part of this conversation came up from a conversation that Tim was having, and then Ken had chipped in, and I'd love for you guys to pop in here for a second. From a standpoint of teaching children, we've been in the market of teaching children all the way back, I guess, to when I was the only child in the program back in Tulsa. But June Rhee Institute had become very focused on teaching kids and on character development for kids. He made it where you had to have at least a B average to be a black belt if you're under 18 back in the 70s. Nick Okinis had been the regional franchise director for Art Linkletter's Totten Kids Transported After School Dance Program. So he was literally running buses, picking kids up at school, taking them over to the dance studio, doing study skills and doing teaching with them all the way back into the, I forget what year that started, but into the late 60s and perhaps earlier. And in the conversation that was going on about teaching, and I do think this is important, there's 2 elements. Number one is if you have 20 students or you have 30 students or you have 40 students, it's a lot different world than if you're running a organization with 2,500, 3,000, 4,000 students. And what happens is, and my best example, and for some people using this example offends them, but I apologize if it does. But one of the people that our organization was very involved with, at least my instructor June Rhee was I mean, he passed away when I was 12, but was Bruce Lee and additionally Muhammad Ali. But Jun Rhee and Bruce Lee's interactions are very interesting. There's a great book by Jun Rhee called Bruce Lee and I. And if you pick it up, it's I've given it to a number of Jeet Kune Do guys because the Jeet Kune Do guys, pardon my language, but tend to have their head up their ass from the standpoint of running commercial schools and how to think about operations and so forth. Is if you pick up that book back into the 60s, Jun Rhee and Bruce Lee were sharing ideas on how to develop martial arts schools in one thing or another. Bruce Lee was sending Jun Rhee the ads that Chuck Norris was doing with his schools, which, by the way, was being developed in conjunction with Pat Burleson, who was Jun Rhee's first black belt in the United States. Pat Burleson and Alan Steen were number 1 and 2. Depends on how they both got their black belt at the same time from Jun Rhee. But if you look at what Bruce Lee did back in the day, is he was very pro commercial, very pro making money, very, I have pictures of him sharing on the set of Enter the Dragon, the pictures of his soon to be, I believe it was a red Rolls Royce Corniche that he ordered when he got the check for Enter the Dragon. But Bruce Lee never really grew beyond teaching 1 or 2 people in his backyard. He did have a school, but it was always very small. He, if you look at his great goal setting worksheet that Jun Rhee was on the phone with him. Bruce Lee was in Hong Kong. Jun Rhee was in Washington, D.C. when he wrote it. It's straight out of Napoleon Hill about having $10 million in his possession, being able to live as he pleased, being the number 1 paid Oriental martial artist or the Oriental actor in the world. But Bruce Lee never really learned how to teach a class of 30 people, a school of 300 people, an organization of 4,000 or 5,000 people. And when it comes to developing teaching methodology or pedagogy, is what happens is somebody who thinks they're good at teaching adults with 10 or 20 people, 5 people at a time, oftentimes have never had to think about curriculum structure. They haven't had to discover and master what we've arrived at over the years with rotating curriculum that makes it a simpler or more manageable process. They've never had to really manage testing cycles, and there's all kinds of missing pieces that as you grow to that level is in place. And what I want you guys to understand is, even though this 6-week program, really it's number 1, it's about all the things that you can do with grassroots effort without spending a ton of money. In other words, I could teach everybody here how to do infomercials, 30-second spots. I could tell you how to go buy ads on the CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox affiliates in your town, how to be on the 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock news. All that worked really well for me over the years. But I was running a multi-million-dollar, in today's terms, my organization was doing $5 million a year in 1986 when I was 26 years old. So if you inflation adjusted the numbers, that's what the comparable is. 3,500 students spread across 6 locations. You can do the numbers in your head. But what we're not trying to do is teach you how to massively ramp up cold direct mail. That works great. It just is every enrollment is going to be relatively expensive, and if your average lifetime value of a student isn't $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, and if your student retention isn't in place, and if you're not generating $700, $800 upfront when you enroll everybody, it's not going to work for you anyway. So what we're really not doing is spending much time on direct mail. We're not spending any time on TV advertising. We're not spending any time on infomercials. We're not spending any time on expensive advertising. What we're spending time with on Wednesday is on grassroots, labor-intensive, beat the bushes, things that you can do with your labor without spending a ton of money. But then what the next thing is, and I see the conversation going on. A lot of you get distracted on all the different things you're trying to do, and you want to develop your curriculum this way. You don't want to develop your a renewal program. You see the idea of leadership, and that gets exciting and so forth. If you have 25 students, none of that stuff is relevant. if you have 75 students, still none of that stuff is relevant. You need to, the whole purpose and all of our marketing was very clear on it. The whole thing you need to do is add 100 students to your school to get critical mass to have momentum. One of the other things that we spend some time with, but not a lot, on these Wednesday meetings is referral systems. Well, the reason for that is if you look at some of our schools, let's say Jason Purcell, Bob, I think it's fair to say we can't shut Jason up when it comes to how great birthday parties are. He's always talking about how many birthday parties they have and how many enrollments they're doing for birthday parties. But I got to tell you, he's running around 350 active students in Seattle. And if you have critical mass, in other words, you have 120, 150, or even better yet, 250 or 300 students, there's a lot of things, a lot of referral systems that you can use that are going to do a great job. Bob, we have the ultimate referral machine and the ambassador program that everybody has access to. They're both great programs. But I will tell you, if you're at 25 or 50 students, none of those things help you very much either. What you have to do is you have to go round up 100 students. And then when you round up 100 students, you'll have enough critical mass that you can start adding to your growth and ultimately maintaining your level of your school when you get to whatever your target point is through referral systems. But going back to teaching methodology and so forth, when I moved to Denver, or before I moved to Denver, one of the things that I knew, again, is the rich dad, poor dad story. I moved to Washington, D.C., thinking I knew how to teach karate and thinking that I knew all the curriculum and thinking that I had a high level of physical mastery. And the physical mastery was more or less true, although once I was hanging out with world-class kickboxers, that opened your eyes a little bit as well. We had, I think at the time, 2, if not 3 U.S. champions and the world champion. Obviously, Jeff Smith was the world light heavyweight champion. Mike Coles was U.S. welterweight champion. Roddy Batiste was U.S. middleweight champion, and so forth. And we had some of the 2 of the 3 at the time world champions in forms. John Chung and Charlie Lee were both on staff. The third that I put in that list is George Chung, who recently bought Black Belt Magazine, who's a good friend of mine. But one of the things I figured out before I moved is June Rhee was doing a great job on things like buying TV spots on the Kung Fu TV show and buying ads constantly in the Washington Post. And he was doing a great job getting press everywhere you look, Washington Post, Washington Times, on TV, and so forth. And one of the things that I realized is that working in the school, or before that, working in the switchboard, they were really good at generating a flood of incoming calls, but I really didn't understand how they were doing it. And June Rhee, to his great credit, let me go through the file cabinet. They showed me the records. I went and lived at the Library of Congress. I went in and lived at the Federal Trade Commission, who at the time was doing hearings on health clubs, and read through all the materials that they had subpoenaed, and which was all of the internal training documents and all the internal documents for every major health club chain in the country, as well as some of the bigger martial arts organizations in the country. So all of the stuff that was not supposed to be public was easily on record at the Federal Trade Commission. You can debate whatever ethics they had by making it a public record, but I had open access to it, and for a dime a page, I could copy anything I wanted. I moved to Denver with a 5-page file cabinet. So before I moved out here, I figured out I needed to do a deep dive on marketing, and in fact, obviously did that fairly well because I managed to enroll 3,500 students in the first 3 years. But the second thing I learned is that although I had been trained really well on how to teach martial arts from the standpoint of a school with 200 or 300 students by June Rhee, from the standpoint of really understanding what they were doing on a broader basis for curriculum design, teaching methodology, and so forth, I needed to do a deep dive on that. And again, one of these lucky incidences is my third black belt was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Lorenzo Trujillo. He had a master's in dance kinesiology, a master's in education administration, a PhD in education in psycholinguistics, and later on, while he was working for me, he went back and got a law degree. But I had pulled Lorenzo aside and said, I need to have the equivalent of a PhD in educational design methodology, teaching structure, so that we can develop this at the highest level. And I went to work for years, but certainly deep dive with him for about 3 years on really going through all the current literature at the time and then staying on top of the literature as it went. A lot of the educational methodology literature that comes out of the educational establishment, sadly, is complete horseshit. But some of it is useful and some of it is applicable to what we're doing, and you can go through that thoroughly. Um, One of our other associates, he doesn't come in on the Wednesday meetings, but he's here on the Thursday and the Tuesdays usually. Is Greg Moody, who also has a PhD in education and in psychology. And one of the things that we teach our members long term, again, not on Wednesdays, but is truly in developing internal teaching methodologies, instructor training, curriculum structure, classroom design, and all the things short of how to teach Shotokan or BJJ or Taekwondo or whatever it might be, given that we have a wider range of styles and backgrounds, and certainly don't want to get into an argument about, where your sporting leg should be on a side kick, or, how you should properly do a chokehold or something like that. But with this program, what I do find, and go back to our conversation yesterday, is the biggest barrier we have with people who are running a small school is expanding their thinking and getting them out of being broke. So getting them out of being my instructors, Bob Ollinghouse, Grant Mulder, David Harrelson, and get them into being my instructors, Jeff Smith, Nick Kokinas, and June Rhee. And so what I would hope that everyone would do is, one, to empty your cup and to realize that you don't have to take a vow of poverty to run a martial arts school. However, in order to go from 25 students or 75 students, to go from 8,000 a month to 30,000 a month, which we consider kind of foundational to be 100 students and 30,000 a month or more. That's kind of foundational numbers. Is to go from that, it either takes a lot of hard work. So you got to get out and beat the bushes. You got to have the tabling at a fair or carnival. You got to be in the summer camps or daycares. You've got to be in the apartment complexes or condo complexes to get to the adult market. You've got to be in the big employers to get to the adult market. You've got to be in the elementary schools to get to the kids market, et cetera. Or you've got to spend a lot of money. When we rolled out the franchises, a startup, one of the things that I learned from other franchisors is that the problem would be is they would sell a franchise, and then the person would spend all their money on facilities and spend all their money on getting open, and then not spend their money on marketing. So I think it was the owner of It's Just Lunch. I was having lunch with her, and she shared the idea, which I cloned, which we made a new school set aside a $35,000 marketing budget to be spent over the first 2 months to get the doors open and to really ramp it up. Now, I'm assuming on these Wednesday meetings that none of you have $35,000 that you can put into direct mail, into marriage mail, and into newspaper inserts and so forth. So we're just doing strictly grassroots stuff. But the lesson is that people have this misperception. Look at the old Kevin Costner baseball movie. If you build it, they will come. It doesn't matter how great a martial arts teacher you are. It doesn't accelerate your referrals. It doesn't matter how highly technically skilled you are, or how many times you traveled to Brazil or to Japan or to China or wherever it might be. If your retention is bad, and retention systems mostly don't have anything to do with your resume, they have to do with your relationship with your students and your ability to help them set long-term goals and long-term ability to follow through. And so most of the martial arts community get stuck in this trap where they're focused on their own development and think that's going to suck in students. No, the only thing that sucks in students is they love you, they have long-term goals, they're excited about your classes, and you implement referral systems, birthday parties, pizza parties, buddy days, ninja nights, movie nights, board breaking days, etc., that gives them an easy entree to bring their friends in. From a standpoint of growing your school, the reason why I did in 1983, my mission was 100 students in the first month, 200 in the first 90 days is my mode of operating. By the way, I did that with no money until obviously the first few schools were open, and then I had serious cash flow. The second school, at least, by then I had serious cash flow, and that was only 90 days later. But to begin with, the reason for that was I could quickly build critical mass and really get some momentum going, and then everything else would feed upon itself. So I will tell you, on our side, the hardest school to work with is the highly skilled martial artist who has 50 students, is doing 7,000 a month. And what they tend to want to do is they want to second guess everything. They want to argue the point. And instead of just taking a right out their front door as soon as they get off the meeting and go implement. Is that a fair way to say it, Bob? That they want to, argue every point. So I will tell you that we spend way more time and effort and pain on our end getting a school that's at 50 students up to 100 students than we do getting a school that's at 200 students to be a million five school. So well, what I would suggest, and again, I don't mean to go on to a rant, although I am, what I would suggest is really sit down, take the blank piece of paper, take that William H. Murray quote that I love. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll share that with you. But it's really sit down and make a decision. Sit down, go to Starbucks or wherever you like to go, do as I do, is sit on the deck and take the blank piece of paper and say to yourself, where are you serious about being with your school a year from now? What are you going to do to make sure that you hit those goals? How do you expand your thinking? And then point number two is, am I willing to do whatever it takes to get to that point? If you're willing to do whatever it takes to get to that point, and your mission is to make a full-time, credible living running a martial arts school, then we will give you all the tools that you need to do that. And at every step of the way, we will give you the pieces that you need in order to move to that next level. But what you don't want to do is get bogged down and second guessing every little piece of the thing. You got to just pull out all the stops. And if you have a ton of money to put into this, we can talk about where you should spend it in paid advertising. You are not going to ramp up quickly just using Facebook and Google. You have to ramp up quickly spending money with additional media, starting with direct mail, with targeted direct mail, with expansive multi-step direct mail, and then moving into marriage mail, moving into inserts and so forth. And if you have money to throw at it, we can walk through that. My assumption tends to be that you don't. Tim, let me shift to you. You're spending a lot of time stressing about how to teach kids. What is your stress point about that?
Well, it's difficult because, as you said in the opening.
Well, no. It is not difficult. So let's eliminate that. But go ahead. Now that I've interrupted you, go ahead.
Let me clarify what I meant when I said it. Mm-hmm. It being my mindset, not
okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's okay. So, I mean, I agree with what you were saying in the opening. Successful people tend to think differently, right? Mm-hmm. So it's hard to know if I'm being objective or if I'm just getting in my own way. I don't think I have the patience or the personality to teach kids. Period.
Well, let me say it differently. Teaching 2, 3, 4, 5 people at a time, I don't have the patience for that. I don't care whether they're 68 years old or they're 7. Teaching 25